I set 2 extra plates at my dinner table that morning, one for the woman my husband had been sleeping with for 8 months, and one for the sister I had not spoken to in 3 years, though only one of them knew she was coming. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this one deserve to be told, and deserve to be remembered. My name is Marguerite Holloway, and I was 41 years old the year my marriage cracked open like a dropped plate, all jagged edges and pieces I could not put back together no matter how carefully I tried. I had been married to Grant Holloway for 16 years, and for most of those years I believed we were building something solid, a life made of small ordinary miracles, a house with a crooked porch step we kept meaning to fix, 2 children who filled our rooms with noise and laughter, a garden I tended every spring with more hope than skill. I was not a woman who thought of herself as naive. I had grown up watching my own parents' marriage dissolve in slow, bitter increments, and I had promised myself I would pay attention, that I would notice the warning signs before they became wounds. And yet I did not notice, not for the longest time, because the signs Grant gave me were so small, so easily explained away, that I mistook them for the ordinary friction of a long marriage rather than the first tremors of an earthquake. It began, as these things often do, with distance disguised as busyness. Grant worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, and his hours had always been long, but that spring they became longer, stretching into evenings, swallowing weekends that used to belong to our family. I told myself it was the promotion he had been chasing, the extra responsibility, the pressure of proving himself to superiors who were younger than he was. I made him plates of food he ate cold at 11 at night. I asked about his day and received shorter and shorter answers, until eventually I stopped asking, not because I stopped caring but because the silence that followed my questions had started to feel like a wall I did not know how to climb. Looking back now, I understand that I had already begun grieving something before I even knew what I had lost, the way you sometimes feel a chill in a room before you notice the window has been left open. Her name was Bianca Renwood, and I did not learn her name until the end of that summer, when a friend from the neighborhood, a kind but nervous woman named Patrice, pulled me aside after church and told me, with her hands shaking around her coffee cup, that she had seen Grant's truck parked outside a woman's apartment on Ferris Street 3 times in 2 weeks. I remember the exact sensation of hearing those words, a kind of falling that happens while your body remains perfectly still, as though the floor had dropped away beneath me while my feet stayed rooted to the church parking lot. I did not cry in front of Patrice. I thanked her for telling me, because I understood even then what it must have cost her to say it, and I drove home with my hands so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles ached for an hour afterward. I did not confront Grant immediately. I want to be honest about that, because I think there is a kind of shame that keeps women silent in these moments, a fear that speaking the truth aloud will make it permanently real in a way that silence somehow does not. Instead, I watched him more closely. I noticed the way he angled his phone away from me at the dinner table, the way he showered as soon as he came home even on days he claimed not to have gone to the gym, the way his voice softened when he stepped into the backyard to take certain calls, a gentleness I remembered from the early years of our courtship, a gentleness that had not been directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. 3 weeks after Patrice's warning, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a lunch at a restaurant across town, 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, a tip that seemed almost apologetic in its generosity, dated for a Tuesday afternoon when he had told me he was meeting with a client in another city. When I finally confronted him, it was not in anger, though I had expected anger to be the emotion that carried me through that conversation. Instead I felt a strange, terrible calm, the calm of a woman standing at the edge of something she cannot yet see the bottom of. Grant did not deny it for long. He was not a cruel man, I want to say that clearly, because this is not a story about a monster, it is a story about an ordinary man who made an extraordinary mistake and then had to live inside the wreckage of it, same as the rest of us. He confessed with his head in his hands, sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten 10,000 meals together, where our children had done their homework, where I had iced birthday cakes and graded stacks of student essays, because I taught high school English at the time, though I would later take a leave of absence I was not sure I would ever return from. He told me her name was Bianca, that she worked at a marketing firm his company partnered with, that it had started as friendship and become something else before he had the courage or the decency to stop it. I did not throw him out that night. I want to explain why, because I think people often expect a woman in my position to react with immediate, righteous fury, packing bags and changing locks within the hour. But I had 2 children asleep upstairs, a 14-year-old daughter named Josephine who was already anxious and watchful in the way of children who sense trouble before they understand it, and an 11-year-old son named Oliver who still believed, in the uncomplicated way of boys his age, that his parents were permanent fixtures of the universe, as reliable as the sunrise. I could not blow up their world in a single night without first understanding what kind of world I would be building for them afterward. So I told Grant to sleep in the guest room, and I lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling, trying to locate some feeling solid enough to stand on. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life, a kind of grief that had no funeral to organize, no casseroles arriving on the porch, no socially sanctioned rituals to walk me through the pain. I moved through my days on autopilot, making lunches, driving carpools, grading papers with a red pen that trembled more than I wanted it to. Grant moved out for a time, staying with his brother across town, and in his absence, the house felt both emptier and somehow more honest, as though the silence had finally caught up to what had been true for months. Josephine asked questions I did not always know how to answer. Oliver grew quieter, which frightened me more than any outburst would have, because I did not know what he was carrying inside that quiet. It was during this period that my sister, Camille, first entered the story, though not yet in person. Camille and I had not spoken in 3 years, not because of any single dramatic rupture but because of an accumulation of small resentments that had calcified into distance the way these things sometimes do between sisters who love each other imperfectly. Our falling out had started after our mother's death, over decisions about the estate, about who had visited more in her final years, about words said in grief that neither of us had fully forgiven. Camille was 5 years younger than me, sharper-tongued, quicker to anger but also quicker to laughter, the kind of woman who filled a room the moment she entered it, while I had always been the steadier one, the one who kept lists and remembered appointments and absorbed other people's chaos without complaint. We had been close once, inseparable as children, but grief has a way of exposing the fault lines in even the sturdiest relationships, and ours had cracked wide open at our mother's graveside, when Camille accused me of controlling the funeral arrangements without her input, and I accused her of never showing up when it mattered, and neither of us had reached out since. I did not call Camille when my marriage began to fall apart. Pride kept me silent, and something else too, a fear that if I let her back into my life during this particular crisis, I would be admitting that I needed her, and needing her felt dangerously close to forgiving her for wounds I was not yet ready to release. So I carried the weight of Grant's affair largely alone, confiding only in Patrice and, eventually, in a therapist named Dr. Okonwe-Bright, a soft-spoken woman with a gift for asking exactly the right question at exactly the moment I least wanted to hear it. It was Dr. Okonwe-Bright who first planted the idea that would eventually lead me to invite Bianca Renwood into my home. I remember sitting in her office, describing the strange, circling anger I carried, an anger that had no clear target because it kept splitting in 2 directions, toward Grant for his betrayal and toward this woman I had never met, this Bianca who existed in my mind only as a collection of assumptions, a homewrecker, a seductress, a villain I had constructed entirely out of my own pain. Dr. Okonwe-Bright asked me, gently, what I thought I would feel if I actually met her, if I put a face to the name, a voice to the silence. I told her I thought I would feel rage. She asked me if I was certain, or if perhaps I was afraid of feeling something more complicated than rage, something that might require me to see Bianca as a person rather than a symbol. That question stayed with me for weeks, working its way under my skin like a splinter I could not quite locate. I found myself thinking about Bianca constantly, not with the venom I expected but with a strange, unwanted curiosity. What kind of woman was she? Was she young? Was she beautiful in some way I was not? Had she known Grant was married when it started, or had he lied to her the way he had lied to me? I hated that I wanted to know. I hated that some part of me, buried beneath the hurt, was curious rather than purely furious. But grief, I was learning, does not organize itself neatly. It arrives in layers, and beneath the anger I found something that looked almost like empathy, though I resisted calling it that for a long time. Grant, for his part, was trying, in the halting, imperfect way of a man who has broken something precious and does not fully know how to begin repairing it. He attended counseling with me, though our sessions were often silent and strained. He ended things with Bianca completely, or so he told me, and I believed him, though belief did not erase the damage already done. He took on more responsibility with the children, driving Oliver to soccer practice, sitting with Josephine while she worked through her homework, small gestures that felt, at the time, both too little and strangely moving. I did not know yet whether I would stay married to him. I told him this honestly, more than once. I told him I needed time, and to his credit, he did not push me, though I could see the fear in his eyes every time I said it, the fear of a man watching the one thing he valued most slip slowly through his fingers. It was nearly 4 months after the discovery of the affair that I made the decision that would change the shape of everything that followed. I decided I wanted to meet Bianca Renwood, face to face, in my own home, on my own terms. I did not tell Grant at first, because I knew he would try to talk me out of it, certain it would only reopen wounds better left closed. But I had come to believe, through many long hours of reflection and through the patient questioning of Dr. O'Conway-Bright, that I could not fully close this chapter of my life while Bianca remained a faceless shadow in my imagination, a monster I had built out of my own worst fears. I needed to see her as a human being, flawed and complicated, not because I owed her anything, but because I owed myself the chance to stop carrying a ghost. I found her contact information through Grant's old messages, which he had shown me in full, unflinchingly, as part of what he called his effort to hide nothing more. I sent Bianca a short, careful email, explaining who I was, though of course she already knew, and asking if she would be willing to meet me, in person, at my house, on a Saturday afternoon when the children would be at their grandmother's for the day. I told her I did not intend the meeting as an ambush or a confrontation. I told her I simply wanted to talk, woman to woman, about the thing that had connected us both to the same broken man. She did not respond for 3 days, and I assumed, with a strange mixture of relief and disappointment, that she had decided against it. But on the 4th day, a reply arrived, brief and cautious, agreeing to come. She wrote that she had wondered, more than once, what I must think of her, and that she understood if I hated her, but that she would rather face that hatred directly than continue avoiding it. There was something in the honesty of her reply that surprised me, a vulnerability I had not expected from the woman I had imagined as calculating and cold. The morning of the meeting arrived bright and warm, an ordinary Saturday in early autumn, sunlight falling in long gold stripes across the kitchen floor, the kind of light that makes even difficult days feel briefly, deceptively gentle. I spent the morning cleaning a house that did not need cleaning, rearranging cushions that were already arranged, because I needed something to occupy my hands while my mind raced through every possible version of the conversation to come. I set out a pot of coffee and a plate of the lemon shortbread cookies my mother used to make, an instinct I did not fully understand until later, some deep-rooted need to offer hospitality even in the midst of heartbreak, as though good manners could somehow steady the ground beneath a moment that threatened to swallow me whole. Grant had gone to pick up the children early that morning and would not return until evening, per my request. I had told him only that I needed the house to myself for a few hours, and though I suspected he sensed there was more to it, he did not press me, perhaps understanding, in his own quiet way, that some things were mine to handle alone. Bianca arrived at exactly the time we had agreed upon, which I noted with a strange, involuntary respect, because I had expected her to be late, had expected some small act of disrespect that would confirm the villain I had constructed in my mind. Instead, she stood on my porch in a simple blue dress, her dark hair pulled back from a face that was, I noted with an ache I had not anticipated, younger than I expected, softer, more uncertain. She was perhaps 32, 33 at most, and there was a tremor in her hands as she held out a small bouquet of white daisies, an offering that felt at once inadequate and deeply sincere. I invited her inside, and for a long moment neither of us spoke, standing in my front hallway with the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between us like a held breath. I led her to the kitchen table, poured coffee for us both, and we sat across from each other in a silence that stretched long enough to become almost unbearable before Bianca finally broke it, her voice barely above a whisper, saying that she was sorry, that she had known, almost from the beginning, that Grant was married, and that she had let herself believe the lies people tell themselves in situations like this. That his marriage was already over in every way that mattered, that she was not truly hurting anyone, that this was somehow different from what it actually was. I listened without interrupting, though every instinct in me wanted to defend my marriage, to insist that it had not been over, that whatever cracks existed had not been the gaping wound she and Grant had chosen to believe. But I held my tongue, because I had come to this meeting not to argue but to understand, and I could feel, beneath Bianca's carefully chosen words, a genuine and painful remorse that surprised me with its depth. She told me about her own history, a childhood marked by her father's repeated infidelities, a mother who had stayed despite everything, a family narrative that had taught her, in ways she was only now beginning to untangle, that love and betrayal were somehow intertwined, that being chosen by a married man felt, perversely, like a kind of validation she had been chasing without fully understanding why. I felt something shift in me as she spoke, not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a loosening of the rigid hatred I had been carrying, a recognition that Bianca was not a cartoon villain but a woman shaped by her own wounds, making choices that had caused real harm while also being, in her own way, as lost as I had felt in the months since discovering the affair. I told her, as gently as I could manage, that understanding her pain did not erase what she had done, that her wounds did not excuse the choice to enter my marriage and take something that was not hers to take. She nodded, tears sliding silently down her face, and told me she knew that she had not come expecting absolution, only the chance to say the words out loud, to the one person she had wronged most directly. We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, the conversation moving through anger and grief and, eventually, something that resembled a fragile, unexpected understanding. I asked her questions I had never allowed myself to ask Grant, questions about how it had started, what he had told her, whether he had ever spoken of leaving me, and her answers, halting and honest, gave me a clearer picture of the affair than Grant's own confessions had, perhaps because Bianca had less to protect, less reason to soften the truth for my sake. I learned that Grant had never promised to leave me, that in fact he had spoken of our marriage with what Bianca described as obvious guilt, that the affair had been, for him, a kind of escape from pressures at work and fears about aging that he had never learned to voice to me directly, fears he had instead poured into the arms of a woman who made him feel, however briefly, young and wanted and free of consequence. It was in the middle of this conversation, as the afternoon light began to shift toward the golden slant of late day, that the doorbell rang, an unexpected sound that made us both startle. I was not expecting anyone. Grant was not due back with the children for hours, and I could think of no one who would be calling on a Saturday afternoon uninvited. I excused myself from the table, my heart still tender from the conversation with Bianca, and walked to the front door with a strange, unplaced sense of foreboding. I opened the door to find my sister, Camille, standing on my porch, a suitcase at her feet, her face streaked with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been crying for a very long time. For a moment neither of us spoke. 3 years of silence stood between us like a physical wall, and I felt the shock of her presence land in my chest with the force of something almost violent, though not unwelcome, a collision of emotions I had no time to sort through before Camille spoke, her voice cracking as she told me that her husband, Desmond, had left her 2 days earlier, that he had been having an affair of his own, with a woman from his office, that she had nowhere else to go, that she knew she had no right to show up on my doorstep after everything that had passed between us, but that I was the only person in the world she could think to turn to. I stood frozen in the doorway, aware of the strange, almost impossible symmetry of the moment, my sister arriving in the wreckage of her own marriage on the very afternoon I was sitting with the woman who had helped wreck mine. There was something almost unbearable about the coincidence, as though the universe had decided, with a kind of dark humor, to force every unresolved wound in my life into the same afternoon, the same house, the same few hours of unbearable emotional weight. I did not hesitate long, though every rational part of me understood how complicated the next few minutes were about to become. I stepped forward and embraced my sister, feeling her shoulders shake with sobs she had clearly been suppressing for the length of her drive, and I told her, without needing to think about the words, that of course she could come in, that whatever had passed between us mattered less in this moment than the fact that she was hurting and had come to me. 3 years of silence dissolved in an instant, not because the old wounds had disappeared, but because grief, I was learning again and again that year, has a way of clarifying what truly matters, stripping away pride and old grievances to reveal the simpler, more essential truths beneath. I led Camille inside, uncertain how to explain the scene she was about to walk into, and I watched her face shift from raw grief to visible confusion as she saw Bianca sitting at my kitchen table, a stranger she had never met, clearly caught in the middle of some private and delicate conversation. I made quick introductions, my voice steadier than I felt, explaining simply that Bianca was someone connected to a difficult chapter in my own marriage, and that I would explain more later, but that for now, Camille needed rest and comfort more than explanations. What happened next surprised me more than almost anything else that day. Rather than retreating awkwardly or excusing herself from what was clearly a fraught family situation, Bianca rose from her seat and, with a gentleness I had not expected from her, offered Camille her chair, insisting she was about to leave anyway, that she did not want to intrude on whatever my sister needed. But something in Camille's raw, unguarded grief seemed to reach Bianca in a way that surprised us both, and instead of leaving immediately, Bianca lingered, offering quiet, practical comfort, pouring Camille a glass of water, asking softly whether she had eaten that day, the kind of instinctive caretaking that comes from a woman who has weathered her own storms and recognizes the particular exhaustion of a person freshly broken. I watched this unfold with a strange sense of unreality, as though I were observing my own life from a slight distance, unable to fully believe that these two women, one who had wounded my marriage and one who shared my blood, were sitting together at my kitchen table on the same ordinary Saturday afternoon, bound together by the strange, unplanned alchemy of shared pain. Camille, through her tears, began to tell us both the story of her marriage's collapse, how she had suspected for months, how she had found messages on Desmond's phone that confirmed what she had feared, how he had left not with cruelty but with a kind of cowardly resignation, packing a single bag and telling her he needed space to figure out what he wanted. Language so achingly familiar to my own experience that I felt my chest tighten with recognition. As Camille spoke, I found myself reaching across the table to take her hand, an instinct that returned as though the 3 years of distance between us had never happened, as though our bodies remembered a closeness our pride had tried to bury. I told her, gently, that I understood more than she knew, that Grant's affair had broken something in our own marriage that we were still, slowly and painfully, trying to repair, and that if she needed a place to stay while she figured out her next steps, our home had room for her, that this was not a question of forgiveness for old grievances but simply of showing up for each other now, in this moment, when it mattered most. Camille broke down fully then, releasing sobs that seemed to carry not only the grief of her marriage's collapse but also, I suspected, the accumulated weight of 3 years of estrangement from the sister who had once been her closest confidant. She told me, through her tears, how much she had missed me, how many times she had picked up her phone to call and set it down again out of pride, how deeply she regretted the words spoken at our mother's graveside, words she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times since, wishing she could take them back. I told her I forgave her, and as I said the words aloud, I realized with a kind of quiet astonishment that I meant them completely, that the old resentment I had carried for 3 years had simply dissolved in the face of her need and my own recent understanding of how fragile and precious our remaining time together truly was. Bianca sat quietly through much of this exchange, an outsider to our family history but clearly moved by what she was witnessing, and at one point she spoke up, her voice tentative, saying that watching us find our way back to each other gave her a strange kind of hope, that perhaps the damage done in her own life and in mine did not have to be the final word, that repair was possible even after profound betrayal, whether within a marriage or between sisters. There was something in her words that struck me deeply, an unexpected wisdom born from her own guilt and regret, and I found myself, in that strange golden afternoon light, feeling something toward Bianca that I never could have anticipated when I first opened my door to her that morning. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take longer, but a kind of grudging compassion, an acknowledgement of her humanity that softened, without erasing, the pain she had caused. We sat together for a long while after that, the three of us, an unlikely gathering brought together by heartbreak and coincidence, sharing the lemon shortbread cookies I had made that morning, the coffee growing cold in our cups as the conversation wound its way through grief and honesty and, eventually, something that felt almost like healing. Camille told stories about our mother that made both Bianca and me laugh despite ourselves, memories of her fierce, funny, complicated love, and I found myself remembering, for the first time in years, not the bitterness of the funeral but the genuine warmth of the woman who had raised us both, a warmth I realized I had let the estrangement with Camille nearly erase from my memory entirely. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, Bianca finally rose to leave, and at the door, she turned to me with an expression of genuine gratitude, thanking me for allowing her into my home despite everything, for giving her the chance to say the things she had needed to say for months. She told me she did not expect forgiveness, that she understood if the wound I carried never fully closed, but that our conversation had given her something she desperately needed, a chance to face the harm she had caused rather than simply running from it. I told her, honestly, that I did not know if I would ever fully forgive her, but that I no longer hated her, that I had come to see her as a woman who had made a devastating mistake rather than the monster I had built in my imagination, and that this shift, however incomplete, felt like enough for now. She left with tears in her eyes, and I watched her walk down the porch steps into the golden late afternoon light, feeling a strange, unexpected lightness settle over my chest, as though some tangled knot inside me had finally begun, slowly, to loosen. If this story is touching your heart the way I hope it is, I want to ask you to pause for just a moment and leave a comment about a time forgiveness surprised you, a moment when compassion showed up in your life exactly when you least expected it, because I believe our stories, shared honestly with each other, are part of what helps us heal. Grant returned that evening with the children, and I watched his face shift through confusion and then quiet understanding as he took in the scene of Camille settled on our living room couch, a cup of tea in her hands, clearly in the midst of a crisis of her own. I explained the day's events to him later that night, after the children were asleep and Camille had retreated to the guest room, exhausted but calmer than she had arrived. I told him everything, about inviting Bianca, about the conversation we had shared, about Camille's unexpected arrival in the middle of it all. Grant listened with an expression of humility I had rarely seen on him, and when I finished, he told me he did not fully understand how I had found the strength to do what I had done that day, to sit across from the woman who had been his mistress and extend her something like grace. I told him honestly that I did not fully understand it myself, that it had felt less like a decision and more like a necessity, a step I had needed to take in order to stop carrying the full weight of my anger alone. The weeks that followed were not simple, because real healing rarely is. Camille stayed with us for nearly 6 weeks while she found her footing, secured a small apartment across town, and began the slow, difficult work of untangling her life from Desmond's. Our old estrangement did not vanish overnight, and there were moments during those 6 weeks when old patterns of irritation flared between us, small arguments about household routines or parenting philosophies that revealed the ways 3 years apart had changed us both. But beneath those small frictions ran a current of restored closeness that neither of us was willing to let go of again, a hard-won understanding that whatever grievances we carried mattered less than the simple, irreplaceable fact of having a sister who showed up. Grant and I continued our slow work of repair as well, and I will not pretend that the road was smooth or that every day felt like progress. There were nights I lay awake replaying his confession, mornings I woke with anger sitting heavy on my chest for no reason I could immediately name. Dr. Okonwe-Bright helped us both understand that healing from betrayal is rarely linear, that grief and forgiveness circle back on themselves in ways that can feel discouraging until, gradually, the circles widen and the pain takes up less space than it once did. Grant worked harder than I had ever seen him work at anything, not just at rebuilding trust through grand gestures but through the accumulation of small, consistent honesty, sharing his phone freely, telling me about difficult days at work instead of retreating into silence, showing up fully for our children in ways that reminded me of the man I had first fallen in love with 16 years earlier. Josephine and Oliver, too, found their own paths through the difficulty of that year. Josephine, ever perceptive, asked me directly one evening whether her father and I were going to stay together, and I told her honestly that we were trying, that trying did not guarantee success but that it meant we both believed our family was worth fighting for. Oliver, younger and less able to articulate his fears in words, expressed his anxiety instead through clinginess, through nightmares that brought him to our bedroom door more nights than I could count that autumn, and I held him through each one, whispering reassurances I was not always entirely certain of myself, but offering them anyway because he needed them. Because sometimes love means offering steadiness even when you are still finding your own. Bianca and I did not become friends, and I want to be honest about that, because I think there is a temptation in stories like this one to tie every thread into a neat bow, to suggest that a single afternoon of honest conversation erases months of pain and betrayal. That is not what happened, and I do not think it would have been true to say otherwise. But something did shift permanently in me that day, a release of the consuming, directionless anger I had carried toward a woman I had never truly known. I heard, through mutual acquaintances in the months that followed, that Bianca had left her position at the marketing firm and moved to another city, seeking, I imagined, a fresh start away from the complicated history she had built in ours. I found myself, somewhat to my own surprise, wishing her well, not because what she had done was forgivable in any simple sense, but because I had seen enough of her humanity that afternoon to understand that harboring endless hatred toward her would only continue to poison a part of me that I needed clean in order to move forward with my own life. The true, lasting gift of that extraordinary Saturday, I came to understand over the following year, was not really about Bianca at all, though our conversation had been necessary and clarifying. The true gift was Camille, was the restoration of a relationship I had nearly convinced myself I could live without, had told myself for 3 long years that pride was worth more than connection, that being right mattered more than being loved. Watching Camille rebuild her own life in the months after Desmond left, watching her find an apartment she slowly filled with plants and second-hand furniture and, eventually, laughter again, gave me a front-row seat to a kind of resilience I had forgotten she possessed, the same fierce, stubborn resilience I remembered from our childhood, when Camille had been the one to stand up for me on playgrounds, to defend me against schoolyard cruelty with a ferocity that seemed impossible from someone so much smaller than her opponents. We began a tradition, Camille and I, of Sunday breakfasts together, just the two of us, at a small diner near her new apartment, a ritual that started as a practical way to check in on each other during a difficult transition and slowly became something sacred, an hour each week protected from the demands of children and work and rebuilding marriages, an hour that belonged only to the bond between sisters. We talked, during those breakfasts, about everything and nothing, about our mother, about our fears, about the slow, uneven process of learning to trust again, whether in a marriage or in a sibling relationship bruised by years of silence. I told Camille things during those breakfasts that I had not even told Dr. Okonwebright, and she offered me a kind of understanding that only someone who shares your history, your blood, your earliest memories, can truly provide. By the following spring, nearly a year after that transformative Saturday afternoon, our family had settled into a new shape, not the same shape it had been before Grant's affair, because some things, once broken, do not return to their original form, but a shape that felt, in its own way, stronger for having been tested. Grant and I had rebuilt something between us that felt more honest than what we had before, a marriage no longer resting on assumptions but on the harder, more deliberate work of daily choice, the choice to stay, to communicate, to keep showing up for each other even on days when showing up felt difficult. I would not say the wound of his affair had fully healed, because I am not certain wounds like that ever fully close, but it had scarred over in a way that no longer governed every interaction between us, a scar I could touch without flinching, evidence of survival rather than an open, bleeding hurt. I returned to teaching that spring as well, stepping back into my classroom with a strange new clarity about the fragility and resilience of the human heart, qualities I found myself discussing with my students in ways I never had before, weaving lessons about forgiveness and growth into our reading of literature. Watching 17-year-olds nod with the particular recognition of young people beginning to understand that adulthood is not the arrival at some fixed, stable shore but an ongoing negotiation with change and disappointment and, if you are fortunate, unexpected grace. Camille eventually began dating again, cautiously, nearly a year and a half after Desmond left, and I watched her navigate this new chapter with a mixture of pride and protective worry that I imagine all sisters feel watching each other risk their hearts again after heartbreak. She met a quiet, kind man named Fenwick who worked as a carpenter and had a gentle sense of humor that reminded me, in the best possible way, of the warmth I remembered from our father before he passed. I did not know, in that early spring, whether their relationship would last, but I knew that watching my sister open herself to love again, after everything, was its own kind of miracle, evidence that hearts broken as badly as hers could still find their way back to hope. Looking back now, from this distance, I understand that the story of that single Saturday afternoon was never really about Bianca Renwood at all, though she was the catalyst, the unexpected teacher who arrived in my kitchen and, without either of us fully intending it, helped crack open something in me that had been sealed shut by anger and grief. The true story was about the choice I made, in the depths of my own heartbreak, to seek understanding rather than remain trapped in bitterness, and about the way that choice, made for reasons I barely understood at the time, opened a door that allowed my sister to walk back into my life at the exact moment both of us needed each other most. I have come to believe, in the years since, that grace often arrives disguised as coincidence, that the universe has a way of placing exactly the right people in our path at exactly the moment we are ready, even if we do not yet know we are ready, to receive them. If this story has touched your heart today, I hope you will take a moment to like this video, to leave a comment sharing what forgiveness or family or second chances mean to you, to share this story with someone in your life who might need a little hope today, and to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss another one of these journeys through heartbreak and healing that our community gathers here each week to share. I think often, still, about that golden autumn afternoon, about the strange, improbable image of the three of us gathered around my kitchen table, women connected by heartbreak in ways none of us could have predicted, sharing lemon shortbread cookies and hard truths in equal measure. I think about how close I came to never opening that door, to letting pride and fear keep me locked inside my own anger indefinitely, and I am grateful, every single day, that some braver, wiser part of myself insisted on reaching out instead of turning further inward. Grant and I celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary last month, a quiet dinner at home with the children, and as I looked around our table that evening, at Josephine now nearly 16 and full of a confidence that makes my chest ache with pride, at Oliver approaching 13 and already taller than me, at Grant across the table with laugh lines deepening around eyes that still, after everything, look at me the way they did when we first fell in love, I felt something I had not been certain I would ever feel again after that terrible summer of discovery and grief, a settled, grateful peace, the kind that only comes after you have walked through genuine darkness and found your way, imperfectly but truly, back into the light. Camille was there too that evening, Fenwick's hand resting easily in hers, and as she caught my eye across the table and smiled, I understood that whatever else that difficult year had taken from me, it had also given me back the one thing I had least expected to find again, my sister, standing at my door when I needed her most, and me, finally brave enough to answer.